In Trackmania, one of the biggest achievements a map can receive is getting featured by Nadeo on the front page of the game. Very few maps get this, with only 7 community maps being featured at a time. However, not all of these maps are equal, and some take a lot less time than others. The easiest slot to get is the Weekly Grind, an endurance map that has collidable ghosts, which gets selected once a week. So today, I'll be seeing how quickly I can make a weekly grind map by giving myself just 1 hour to make it. Let's get into it. But before we start mapping, let me explain what a weekly grind map actually is. Every week, Nadeo chooses a 10-lap endurance track, but what makes it special are the ghosts. Alongside the player, there will be 32 collidable ghosts that the player races against. These ghosts are set from the author time. Not crashing into these ghosts is the hardest part of playing this map, so mappers have to think about the ghosts while they're building the map, and if they don't, the map may become frustrating to play. These maps are also free to play, so they're aimed towards beginner players. This means mappers have to make their maps really easy, which means that they usually tend to be quite wide. The reason the weekly grind is the easiest map to get is simple: not many people map for it. This allows for less known mappers to get their maps in, and also makes it easier to do it in an hour. Now, before I begin the map, I need to prepare and make a plan for it. I need to spend my time wisely when making the map, so I don't run out of time. I'll have to spend around 10 minutes at the end of the map validating it, which gives me 15 minutes to build it. I can split this into a 30-minute routing stage, which should give me enough time to make a decent route, and leaves 20 minutes for scenery. So with that said, let's begin the map. Seeing as the track is multi-lap, the player would have speed as they start the lap, so I did a little platform with a booster, in order to test the map with roughly the same speed the player would have when they play it. I then got started on the route. While I'm routing, I'll have to think quickly and build whatever first comes to mind. I'm aiming for the route to be around 40 seconds, so I'll have less than a minute per second off route, meaning I'll have to work really fast. I soon found a turn that worked. This isn't a turn you'd usually see in a track of the day map, as it's far too wide, but with the player dodging ghosts, it gives them the space they need to get around them. This then led on to a dirt section. I gave the player a reactor down boost before adding a slope turn. I've used this turn before in some of my maps, and is the first thing that came to my mind. I then made a short tarmac section, allowing the player to re-angle themselves, as there'll be a variety of different angles coming up from the previous dirt turn. This was followed by a grass section. I made it wider than I felt it should have been, just to give the player the extra bit of space they'd need while they drive it. I then made a section of track I've always wanted to make in a weekly grind. What I did was place loads of penalty grass to slow the player down. I also placed grass paths on this. The player would carry more speed if they go on the grass paths, however it may lead them off the racing line. And the ghosts would provide an interesting challenge to the player, as they may be going on different parts of the path depending on the lap, while also not being too easy to crash into, as the player would be going at a low speed. This then led up to another tarmac section. At this point, I had to start thinking about getting the player back to the multi-lap block to start the next lap. Up to this point, the map has been very simple and I didn't want it to end up being too bland, so I made a drift. While the drift itself is pretty easy, with the ghosts it might be challenging, so I made a mental note to myself to drive far off the racing line when I validated the track. At this point, I was getting close to the multi-lap block. However, I didn't have much time left until I had to start making the scenery. So rather than trying to find a good turn to go up to the multi-lap, I just built a simple jump to it. While this is my least favourite part of the map, I don't really have much time to find anything else. And when I'm driving the author time, I'll remember to go slowly at this jump, so the player can jump over the ghost while they play it. Now, with the route done, it's time for scenery. I started by creating a simple landscape around the route. I went a bit quicker than I usually do while mapping scenery, however it soon became clear that at this pace I wouldn't have time to finish it. This meant I had to start accelerating my pace. I went from fairly thoughtful placements at the start to just spamming blocks down by the end. While this isn't ideal, the average player should hopefully not be able to spot this while driving. While I was doing this, I did some calculations in my head. The 10 minutes I gave myself for validation would only be used up if each lap was a minute long. However, when I tested it, it was much closer to 40 seconds. While I'll have to drive a bit slower during the validation one, so I can go off the racing line at some points, I'll still have an extra couple minutes to do scenery. After spending the majority of my scenery time on it, the landscape was finally complete. I drove a lap just to check that everything looked okay. At the first turn, as the player was angled upwards, the scenery looked as though it's just one colour, which didn't look very good. So I decided to add some black bars to the hill to vary the colour of it and make it look better. However, I won't have time to do this for the entire track. After that, I got onto the trees. I had to quickly spam some sand around the track for the trees to go on. I was very low at time at this point and ended up placing it rather unequally, which isn't ideal, but it had to do. I then started placing trees on these sand blocks, and once I finished that, I spent the last few seconds I had filling up the sparse areas with a bit more sand and trees. But as I was doing this, disaster struck. The game crashed. Luckily, I had been saving the map throughout the hour, so when I booted the map back up, the landscape was still there. However, I had to rebuild the sand and trees. During the run, my timer was on my second monitor and I wasn't recording it, so I didn't know exactly how long I had left. While I was making the map, I also paused the timer to go AFK for a bit, so both the in-game and recording timers wouldn't be accurate either. I did remember roughly when I saved the map, and I thought I had around 12.5 minutes left, but there may be a margin of error with it being a couple minutes longer than that. As I didn't want to break my flow to look at the footage, I decided to give myself roughly this amount of time to finish the map. I then placed the sand and trees back down again, making sure to spread it more equally this time, and started a validation run. At this point, I was on target to finish as the timer hit 0, but a minute into my run, I noticed something. I'd forgotten to set the number of laps to 10, so I had to abandon this run and quickly fix this. It also turned out I'd forgotten to enable clones, so I had to quickly fix both of these. But due to a glitch, when I changed the lap count, the map changed colour palettes, so I had to fix this as well. And when I eventually restarted the validation run, I was far behind schedule. It was now extremely critical that I didn't fail this run. If I was to crash in a way that meant I had to respawn, I'd have to reset my run, as if I respawned, a ghost could teleport right in front of the player, which would be very annoying for them. Due to my lack of time, if this happened, I'd miss the 1 hour limits. I had a couple close calls, but managed to survive the run, and also made sure to go offline when I had to. Once I finished the run, I quickly made a thumbnail and saved the map, finishing my hour. The time I set when I restarted the run said 14 minutes, which is a bit longer than I'd hoped it would have been, but it's still within my margin of error, so I decided it was fine. And with that, the map is done. It's now time for map review. In order for my map to be selected, it has to go through map review. This is a server where you submit your map, people play it for 3 minutes, and then vote on it out of 5 stars. This lets the day know which maps they should look at when they decide what to choose for next week. As weekly grands aren't that competitive, lower scores are needed for Nadeo to see your maps. When I made my first weekly grand, it got reviewed with a 4-star rating at only 4 votes. But as I made it soon after the modes came out, the score I need for my map to get reviewed may have gone up since then. Weekly grands are selected on Sundays, and reviews usually happen a couple days before this. As I made my map on a Friday, it's unlikely it'll be reviewed in time for the next selection, meaning I have around a week to get a score good enough on my maps for it to be reviewed. I submitted it for the first time and got a pretty good score, with a 4.7 star rating from 3 votes. However, one of them was my vote. It's a pretty good score, and if I kept up the rating and got a few more votes, it'd be on course for a review. However, when I woke up the following day, I saw it fall into a 3.6 star rating with 7 votes. This happened because of autoqueue. When the maps in map review servers run out, they randomly select a map with a good rating for the players to play on. This may seem like a good thing, as your map can get more votes without you having to submit it. However, certain times of the day, usually an hour before and after a cup of the day, are better times to submit your map, as mappers and players are in the server at that time, which means you can get a fair score. But at different times of the day, different players are on. These players consist mainly of trolls and newer players, who tend to give worse ratings. It is also these times of the day when maps are most likely to be auto-queued, leading to map ratings falling overnight. 3.6 stars is probably too low to get a review from, so I decided to reset and try again, in order to get rid of the 1 and 3 star votes that my track was carrying. My second attempt started off well. I managed to get 4 stars from 6 votes. While I did get hit by a 1-star troll, apart from that these were some very good votes, and I could definitely work with it. But unfortunately, I was hit with autoqueue yet again. So I resetted and tried again. I got another promising start with a 4.3 star rating from 3 votes, but again this was hit by autocue. This was now my 4th attempt, and it felt like I was constantly restarting, so I decided that even if I got a bad score after autocue, I wouldn't reset. I started off well with a 4.5 star rating in the first session. Autocue knocked this down to a 3.8 star, but I was able to get it back up to a 4 star after the second submission. I managed to dodge autocue, but only one person voted in the following session, bringing it up to 4.1 stars, before autocue sent it back down to 3.9 stars. At this point, I was getting tired of submitting the map over and over again, and I had much more promising maps waiting to go through map review, so I decided to wait until Sunday, the day that the weekly grands are picked, and if it hadn't been reviewed by then, I'd go again. So I waited, checking every day to see if it had gotten the review tag, but as Sunday rolled around, it hadn't got it, so I prepared myself for the 5th attempt. That night, I logged onto the game, expecting a normal mapping session, but before going into the map editor, I decided I'd check the new weekly maps as I do every week, and, to my surprise, my map had been selected. And with that, the challenge is a success. I wasn't expecting it to be selected due to it not having the review tag, which my previous weekly grind and all my failed track of the day attempts have received. This may be due to the fact that that week's weekly short was a promotional esports World Cup week, so the weekly grind was the only weekly track being reviewed, and it would have been very easy to forget to put the review tab on it. I'm pretty happy with how this track turned out, and it's definitely the best of my 2 weekly grinds. If you enjoyed this, I've done a similar challenge to this in the past, where I tried to make a track of the day in 1 hour, and another mapping YouTuber, Pysber, did a challenge where he tried to make a weekly short in 1 hour, so check both of these out. If you want to see my future content, feel free to subscribe and join my Discord server, and I'll see you later. Bye!